In this lesson, we're going to just do a brief introduction to rearranging equations to solve algebraic formulas. Now, you're going to need this for some of your future coursework. So this is going to get us going. We're going to spend about 3 classes working at solving algebraic expressions. So we're going to start easy and we're going to keep numbers in them, and then we'll eventually take out numbers and just work at rearranging letters. And we're going to be solving for what's called an unknown. Now we're going to start with some really simple one-step problems that you could easily do in your head. So these are questions that you hardly need to pick a calculator for. We hardly need to actually do any math for, but they're really good basic starting points. So the first question we're going to look at is x plus 2 equals 10. We need to solve for the variable x. So x is what's called a variable. If it's been a while since you've done math, variable or unknown. There just might be terms that I use that you're maybe not as familiar with. So this is our variable. We need to solve for x, so we need x alone. In order to get x alone, we need to move this plus 2. Okay, we need to move that component. So in order to move it, we want to undo the math. So if you think about taking something apart, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, you guys know that from tightening or loosening bolts. Opposite direction gives you the opposite result. Math's the same thing. So we're going to, instead of adding 2, we're going to subtract 2. And whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. And that's because of the equal sign. The equal sign tells us that we have an equality. So in order to balance the relationship, whatever you do to one, you have to do to the other. So plus 2, take away 2 leaves us with 0. So this, you'll often see me write it like this, goes to 0. And now we're left with x equals 10 take away 2, which is 8. I'm sure you could have told me that without going through the steps, but by going through the steps, it'll help us when we get to something that's more complicated. In this scenario, this is 6 times x equals 24. The opposite operation would be divide. So we're going to divide by 6. Whatever we do to one side, we're going to do to the other. When we divide by 6, the 6's cancel out. On this side, we'll solve the math. X equals 24 divided by 6 gives us 4. X equals 4. And for algebraic equations, it's really nice to throw boxes or circles around your answer. It just makes it easier to find it on the page. I labeled these as 2-step questions, but I guess they're technically 2-step questions. It looks like a 1-step question. We'll start over on this side. This side, the question looks quite simple. It looks like a 1-step question, and it could potentially be, depends on how you look at it. So we have x, we want to solve for x. So we need to move this 36. Now it's 36 take away x. This 36 doesn't have a negative sign in front of it, so it would be considered a positive 36. So if we subtract 36 from this side, and we subtract 36 from this side, well, this is going to go to 0. So we're going to have 0 minus x. So that leaves us with just a minus x. We have to leave that minus in front. Equals 21 minus 36 leaves us with minus 15. Okay? Now you'll notice we have a negative sign here and a negative sign there. In order to get rid of our negative signs, we need to divide by something that's going to change the sign. So what we do is we divide by negative 1. Dividing both sides by negative 1 gives me x equals 15. Okay? There is another way we could have done that question. So I'm going to put a little line down here and we'll throw or. Or we could have said 36 minus x equals 21. We could have moved the negative x first. And let's say, well, we want the x to be positive because when we solve for x, we never want to get negative x. So we could say, well, plus x on this side, plus x on this side. 36, equals, I'm going to leave an extra line in there. We'll get rid of that. 36 equals 21 plus x. Now subtract 21 and we get, this goes to 0, so we get 15 equals x. exactly the same solution, but two different ways to get there. That's one of the challenges with algebra is I may show one way and you may find there's another way to do it. As long as you're following the math rules, you could have two different ways to get there. That's not unusual. Now, if we look at this question over here, there are definitely two different ways to do this one. I'm going to stick with the easiest one. So we have 3 times x minus 9 equals 21. When you have multiple math steps involved, you have to follow backwards order of operations. So just like if you're putting brakes on a car or putting something together, the order for taking it apart is usually exactly the opposite, or else the pieces aren't just going to stack the right way. So that's what we're going to do. So if you remember BEDMAS, set brackets first, then you multiply, then the last thing you do is add or subtract. We're going to do our adding and subtracting first. The math term for this is called combining like terms. And this 6 and a 21 are considered like terms because they don't have a letter attached to them. 3x is a different type of term because it has x attached to it. So our first step is to combine our like terms, or basically put the numbers on one side and then the things that have x's on the other side. So to do that, if it's minus 9, we're going to add 9, and we'll add 9 to both sides. So this is going to go to 0. So 3x equals 21. Now we divide both sides by 3. It's 3 times x, so we're going to divide by 3 to get rid of, or to move it to the other side. So this goes, and now we're left with just x on the left-hand side equals, 21 divided by 3, which is equal to 7. Okay, so x equals 7, be our final answer. So really not too complicated, but it's combining the things with x's on one side first. So first, kind of split things up. Anything with an x on one side, things without an x, we're going to put on the other side, and then we work at combining things together. This is a really good example of combining like terms. So we're going to have to move several things here. We have a 7x on this side plus 7 equals 63 minus x. So let's move all of our x's to the left-hand side of the equation. So let's put this minus x on this side. To do that, we're going to add x to both sides. Now we're left with 8x plus 7 equals 63. Now let's move the 7 to the other side. So now we're left with 8x equals 56. Divide both sides by 8. Dividing or multiplying is going to typically be one of our last steps to do. And we are left with x equals 7. So first combine, and then we divide. All right, let's do the next question. So we have 9 plus 6x equals 4x plus 25. Let's use the same process. Now, which x are we going to move first? You'll notice here I moved the negative x first because we don't want to be left with negative x. So over here, I would suggest using that same approach. Move the x that's not going to give you a negative x. So if I take 6x, it's 9 plus 6x, so I'm going to have to go minus 6x, and I subtract 6x from the other side, I'm going to be left with that negative x, and that's not ideal. So instead, let's move the 4. So we'll subtract our 4x. 6x minus 4x, that's easy to do. So now I'm left with 9 plus 2x equals 25. Let's move our 9. So now I have just x's on one side. 2x is equal to 25 minus 9 leaves us with 16. Divide both sides by 2, and x equals 8. Okay. I could do algebra questions like this all day. I actually really enjoy it. Doesn't mean every once in a while I don't make a mistake and slip an order or accidentally write a wrong number down, but I really like doing these algebraic expressions, so call me a little nerdy. Okay, so what happens if we have brackets? If we have brackets, it's not that much more complicated, but we need to know what's called the distributive property. So what that means is This 3, it's 3 times everything inside these brackets, because normally you'd combine this first and then multiply by 3. So you'd multiply everything inside here by 3. So mathematically, I'm going to give you 2 ways to do this particular question. So mathematically, I'm going to distribute this 3 to each of the terms inside. So I'm going to go 3 times 8 and 3 times x. Okay, and I like putting those little arrows there. They keep people organized. So 3 times 8 will give me 24, plus 3 times x gives me 3x equals 9. We've got rid of our bracket because we distributed the 3 inside, and now we can just do some simple math. So let's combine our terms. And I think we're definitely going to end up with a negative in this question. So minus 24, minus 24. So 3x is equal to 9 minus 24 leaves us with negative 15. We're going to divide both sides by 3. And if you don't remember the rules for negative signs, a negative divided by a positive is going to leave us with a negative. So x is equal to negative 5. We won't deal with negative signs very often. You will see them more in adding and subtracting. Every once in a while, I forget to remove a question that had negative signs in it. And it's just we don't see them quite as often, and we can usually work with them as positives. The other way to do this question is 3 8 plus x equals 9. So the other way to do this question is to do it like this. We can divide both sides by 3 right at the beginning. So this 3 cancels out. 9 divided by 3 gives me 3. So 8 plus x equals 9. Oops, sorry, equals 3. I'm like, math is not working. How in the world? Where did the mistake go? 8 plus x, 9 divided by 3. So 8 plus x equals 3. Subtract 8 from each side, and x equals negative 5. So 2 ways to get exactly the same thing. But remember, this 3, it either has to get distributed into everything or you have to move it completely. Now, you're not always going to be able to move it completely. This is great for something where you have just a single term on the other side, especially when there's no x's there. But here we have x's on both sides of the equation, plus we have our brackets. So this is a question where we're going to have to distribute. There's no other way to do it other than distributing. Because if you were to divide both sides by 3, you'd have to divide both of these by 3. It's going to get even messier and you're going to end up with fractions. So let's distribute. So 8 plus x equals 3x plus 6. Nice and easy. Let's move some things around. So let's move the x to the other side. Subtract x from both sides. 8 equals 2x plus 6. We'll move the 6 back over. 2 equals 2x. And 1 is equal to x if you divide both by 2. Okay. Key thing is to distribute, get rid of your brackets first. All right. And finally, we're going to do a couple examples with fractions. Now, I'm going to go back to these ones in the next lesson. So if you feel a little overwhelmed, you want to do some practice, you're not going to see a whole bunch of these ones in your quiz today, but you'll see some of the basic ones. But next week, we'll definitely look at a few more, what happens when they're more complicated scenarios. So 2 plus x over 2 equals 13. Now there's 2 ways to handle this. Again, this 2 is divided by 2, this x is divided by 2. So we'd have to distribute the divide by 2 to both of them, but that's always complicated. The easiest way to deal with fractions is to get rid of the fraction. So this is 2x plus 2 plus x divided by 2. So why multiply both sides by 2? Multiplying is always easier than dividing. So let's multiply the 2 out. 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top, they cancel. So we're left with 2 plus x equals 13 times 2 is 26. Now we're down to an easy question. Minus 2, x equals 24. Now to test your work, one easy thing to do is put 24 in here. 2 plus 24 divided by 2, does that give you 13? It's a really easy way to check and see have you got the right question, the right answer. So putting it back into the equation. Now if we look at the next one, this one is just really ugly looking. But let's go back to some simple pieces. We have x's on this side and a fraction with it. Let's pretend that doesn't exist for a few minutes. Then we have a 1 plus 6x, so I have an x here and a 2x here. Let's combine those terms first. So I could move this 2x because I can subtract. And we're going to have, that's going to leave us with 1 plus 4x equals, now this has gone to 0, so we just made it a little bit simpler. We got rid of one of the ugly pieces, 5x plus 9 divided by 4. Well, that looks a little bit better. That's looking a little bit like what we had before. Now, it'd be really nice if we didn't have this fraction because that fraction is just ugly. So let's do times 4. Okay? And whatever we do to one side, we're going to do to the other. So we're going to do times 4, but we have to remember we've got to multiply the whole side by 4. So these two cancel out. And we're going to do 4 times 1 and 4 times 4. 4 times 1 leaves me with 4 plus 16x equals 5x plus 9. That's looking a little bit nicer. Every time we do a question, it's getting a little bit easier. So every time we simplify. So what we're going to do is let's start rearranging some pieces. So we'll subtract 5x from this side, minus 5x from that side. That makes this go to 0. I'm going to move the 4 at the same time. So I'm going to take 4 away here, and we'll take 4 away here. Now there's going to be no numbers here. So that goes to a 0, and that goes to a 0. 16 minus 5 gives me with 11x equals 9 take away 4 is 5. Divide both, by 5. Divide this by 5. And x is equal, did I say divide by 5? Anybody catch that mistake? I should have divided by 11. Just one of those moments as I'm calculating. Divide both sides by 11 because the 11 is what's in front of the x. So 5 divided by 11 leaves us with 0.45. It's a repeating decimal. Sometimes we use a little line on top to show that it's repeating if it doesn't tell you to where to round. So we can use that. And that gives us our final answer. Now, most of the time you'll give your final answer in decimal form. If you gave it to me as a fraction, that wouldn't be the end of the world either. You could say x equals 5/11. That would be fair. But typically, we will end up using decimal form because usually when we're solving algebra, most of the time, we are looking for in a physics context or something like that where decimal measurements make the most sense for us. And that gives you some of the basic pieces, gone from easy to difficult with solving some fraction problems. You've done or solving some algebraic questions. You've done some of them with ratios already. So give the quiz a try and see what you get. And then next lesson, we'll look at a few more examples and we'll just spend a couple of days working at how to solve algebraic equations.